We are delighted that this episode of Starts at the Top is sponsored by Avato CRM Solutions. Avato CRM Solutions designs and delivers award-winning customer service, business process outsourcing, and digital and intelligent automation solutions for some of the world's most respected brands, as well as innovative charity and public sector clients. They partner with clients to help them define their customer experience and transformation strategies by implementing the right technology, people, and processes to improve their customer journey while driving new efficiencies and helping them prepare for the future. To find out more about how Avato CRM Solutions could help an organisation like yours, and to receive a free, no obligation chat, visit avato.co.uk/Wales Air Ambulance.
It was 100 years ago that we moved from a 6-day working week to a 5-day working week. In some respects, I think it's quite bizarre that we're still wedded to this model, given the world of work has obviously transformed since then.
Welcome to a brand new episode of Starts at the Top, our podcast about digital leadership and change. I'm Paul Thomas.
And I'm Zoe Amma. This week, we're excited to share our conversation with Jo Ryle, who is the director of the 4-Day Week campaign. This is a subject that has been even more front and centre of all of our minds since the pandemic, and something you and I speak about quite often, isn't it, Paul?
Yeah, it's something that comes up a lot, and in conversations we've had with people about flexible working conditions and patterns, and how I think, the pandemic caused us all to reset the way our working weeks are set up and shape up. But this was interesting because I think what Joe and his team are edging towards is more systemic and societal change. And it makes for a really interesting conversation. But so how do you feel about it, Zoe? I know we've talked about this before, but are you ready to make the move to a 4-day week or even a 9-day fortnight?
Oh, I would love to do that. I've had an aspiration about doing this ever since I started my business 10 years ago. And I know it is something I will do at some point. I think I'm just not organised enough to do it at the moment. How about you?
Yeah, kind of similar. And I think it does come down to that organisation, doesn't it? So I was having a conversation with somebody that we both know not so long ago, and they do a really good thing where they block out meetings every second Friday and try to take every second Friday off. So essentially a 9-day fortnight. But I think it's that crucial bit that I think the first step towards doing that is no meetings. So, putting nothing in the calendar for that Friday so you can actually concentrate on some of the things that you need to concentrate on. And I think discipline around that is probably key. The first thing for me when it comes to that sort of stuff always starts with actually just not opening email. That's the killer app, I think. If you don't open email, your start to the day is so much more sort of serene. It's the email inbox and things that have happened overnight or early in the morning that tend to throw me off when I've set the day to do something else. But yeah, it's interesting. And I think Joe's insight into it's really interesting. And it'd be good to know from our listeners how they're experimenting with giving people that flexibility back into their lives. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Other thing we were going to discuss was Threads. You made the move over, I see.
I have moved some of my social presence over there, if that's not a grandiose term. Basically, I've set up an account. I'm still on Twitter, obviously not engaging with it as much as other people are in the same sort of way. I think everyone is engaging in a much more transactional way with Twitter now, unfortunately, because that's just become the norm for that platform. But I've got quite a good feeling about Threads. I mean, it will be interesting to see how it develops. The big challenge with it at the moment is they just don't seem to be listening to user feedback about accessibility. And that is going to limit their capacity to scale. I mean, surely they understand that. It's a real shame. They've missed out on there big time.
It would be nice for one of these platforms to start off on the right foot on many different levels rather than just the one. So they've got the bit about a welcoming community, quite right, but not welcoming everyone. So that's a big thing to fix. But
It shouldn't be an afterthought. You shouldn't be doing and accessibility. You should be doing accessibility and, shouldn't you? You should be starting with that would be a much better differentiator from Twitter, wouldn't it? How might we make this new platform as inclusive and democratic as possible, and then build the other functionality around it? And it would probably be much easier to make decisions if you make inclusion and accessibility the key cornerstones.
No, I completely agree. But don't forget, these are engineers that have only worked on Facebook and Instagram. It's not like they've done this before. It's a brand new venture from a team of people that should have some previous in how to set these things up right, and plenty of experience doing so. I'm sort of quite surprised to find myself on it, because I haven't mourned the death of Twitter as much as I thought I would. So when I sort of saw Threads and thought, just as I was sort of getting out, you dragged me back in, and that's essentially my first thread. It was like, oh, here I am. But I think it's good to be there and good to sort of see how it shapes up. I guess watch this space, see how it develops over time. But you're right, there are some certain fundamentals that it needs to start getting right quite quickly. Otherwise, they're going to find themselves with their own revolt and people leaving in droves. I was interested also to see Ian Dunt, who obviously was a guest on this podcast, sort of claiming it as this is the place to be now. But it'd be interesting to see whether journalists and the news agenda sort of moves from Twitter over to something else, because I think Twitter is still so ingrained in that world. So
I'm not sure that it will move over. So I'm sure I saw a post from Ian actually not long after launch saying that, and forgive me, I hope I'm not misquoting Ian here, so please do check his feed. I'm pretty sure I saw a post from him saying something about how news wasn't going to be as much of a priority in the algorithm. And I think he was quoting someone from the actual platform, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, well, it wouldn't surprise me, because if one of the things they want to do with it is to make it a friendlier, more open space, then putting that stuff back in straight away, which is what causes most people to fall out with each other and have that negative discussion, is possibly a misstep. But we will see. We will wait and reserve judgment for later in the next season. We'll come back to it and see whether we're still using it. And also this week you launched the Charity Digital Skills Report. So we can just talk about that for a minute.
Yeah, and we'll put a link to that in the show notes. Yeah, very exciting report this year, for the reason that for the first time we asked people in a bit more depth about how they were responding to the challenge of AI. So we actually ran a flash poll alongside the survey, as well as exploring some more lighter touch emerging tech issues within the report itself. Definitely seen a massive increase in interest in this area over the last year, unsurprisingly. So 66% of charities said that they're interested in making use of emerging tech, such as AI and ChatGPT. So that was actually up very, very significantly from the year before. It was only 15% in 2022. So it would be interesting to see how that develops further across the sector. And of course, cost of living, the other big topical issue of the year. So 27% of charities saying that the cost of living is a significant challenge to how they are using digital. And that's where funders listening to what charities are saying in the report about how they need more funding, more support, more guidance with digital is really, really key. So we hope that funders will listen to what charities are telling them through the mechanism of the report and respond to that.
Yeah, it's having an impact, isn't it, on many levels. But when it comes to ability to invest, I guess, is it a mixture maybe perhaps of when some cases where digital technology can be quite hard to sell into organisations, and yet you add the added benefit of, or the added cost implications to that, and it just becomes something that we can do that tomorrow, rather than getting on board with it now. The AI shift is incredible, though. up to 60. Did you say 66%?
Yeah. I mean, it's huge. And then also what we saw in the flash poll was, 78% saying that AI is relevant to their charity and could transform it. So that was much higher than I anticipated, actually. So that's good news. But 73% said that they didn't feel prepared to respond to the opportunities and challenges of AI. So right now in the sector, what we've got is people very much seeing that there's an opportunity here, but also not feeling prepared to respond. So the readiness just isn't there yet. I really hope we'll start to see a sea change in that over the next few months. It would be great to see the regulator, sector bodies coming together, and funders as well, obviously, to provide that support and guidance and convening spaces for charities to learn together about AI and how we can influence the policy in this area as well, because that is also a vacuum right now.
Yeah, it's huge. It's huge. In another AI-related news, we went to see the new Mission Impossible film last Friday, which is all about the rise of AI and the challenge of AI, and as a global concern. So, if Tom Cruise is worrying about it, then the rest of us need to be thinking about it too.
Yeah, well, he would be a great podcast guest if he fancied coming along.
He needs to get in line.
Needs to get in line. We do have some exciting people lined up for next season, don't we? And he would need to join the back of the queue.
Yeah, we need to vet him before he comes on. I think make sure he's got plenty to say. Anyway, talking of somebody that's got plenty to say, over to our interview with Joe Ryle. So we have a lot of discussion on Starts at the Top about how we're all making changes to the way that we work post-pandemic. And for years, it seems, we've been talking about and looking for a better work-life balance. A recent poll showed that 58% of the British public expected a 4-day week to be the normal way of working by 2030, with only 22% believing it wouldn't. The 4-day week campaign is leading the way on this search for balance, and we're delighted to welcome its director, Joe Ryle, to the podcast. Hi, Joe, and welcome to Starts at the Top.
Hi, thanks for having me on here.
You're very welcome. So can you tell us and our listeners a bit more about your background and how you got involved in campaigning for this fundamental change in the way that we're approaching the working week?
Yeah, so I've been working for a long time, I guess, like most people, like 5 days a week, sometimes more than that. I used to work for the Labour Party and was involved in a couple of general election campaigns, and I think in those days we were working 6 days, seven days a week on general election campaign. And I was always lucky to take part in work that I largely really enjoyed. But I just remember being quite struck by this kind of reality that there wasn't much time for life outside of work, and that especially working in kind of high-end, sort of high-level politics job, like this kind of sense that my personal identity was a bit lost or something that was so kind of defined by work that I was kind of like, who am I outside of this? And so I think when I was working, I did go down to 4 days. I took the loss of, I did take a pay cut at that point, but I was suddenly so much enjoying life a lot more, enjoying work a lot more, but also, had a much better sense of who I was and what I enjoy outside of work. And I just felt like it was something, it just felt like the balance wasn't right, like doing 5 out of your 7 days every single week, doing the same thing every day. It just didn't feel like the balance was right. It didn't feel like life had a good balance to it. And so I did think there was something in there in terms of the wider population that people could kind of, that appealed to people. And so, after working for the Labour Party and after those kind of elections, because the Labour Party did put the 4-day working week in their manifesto at the 2019 general election, but they didn't do so well in that election. But I felt like it was something which deserved more attention, deserved more support. And so, I got involved in the campaign quite soon after that election.
It's great, and it has sort of hung around as a conversation for years and years. Every employer I've ever met has sort of talked about striving for this work-life balance, and I'm always conscious, I think Zoe's the same, that there's this race every Friday to get to the end of the day and tick off the to-do list. But then Monday comes around, so this balance of 5 days versus 2 days, that the creation of the weekend is a sort of a concept that's been around for a number of years, but it's obviously getting that to the point where it feels a little bit outdated.
I mean, yeah, very outdated. I mean, it was 100 years ago that we won the weekend. It was 100 years ago that we moved from a 6-day working week to a 5-day working week, which at the time, was designed for a more agricultural, industrial economy. And in some respects, I think it's quite bizarre that we're still wedded to this model, given the world of work has obviously transformed since then. And if you look at the history, there's an interesting chart which shows the kind of decline in working hours since then, and working hours gradually did reduce until around the 1980s. But since the 1980s, they've almost flatlined. We're almost working the exact same amount of hours as we were in the 1980s. When you think about all of the productivity gains we have had over the last few decades, none of that has really been passed back to workers in terms of more free time, more leisure time. So we do think this is a change which is long overdue.
Yeah. Zoe, I was thinking it's that age-old conversation when you're at social occasions, when you do have your 2 days off, you're at social occasions and people say, so what do you do, Paul? And it's like, could we have a conversation about music, about, stuff that I enjoy outside of work? We're defined by our working roles and our professions. And that surely needs to change, given everything that we've been through in the past few years and even the last decade or so.
Why is that, do we think? I mean, why do we all, and I'm guilty of doing it myself too, just define ourselves so much by what we do and how busy we are?
I mean, I think it's a really fascinating discussion because, we do have an acute problem in the UK where we do work some of the longest working hours in Europe, some of the longest hours in the world. I think apart from Greece, we work the longest hours in Europe, while also having one of the least productive economies. So like all these long working hours we're doing isn't making us very productive. And I do think that seeps in culturally, doesn't it? I mean, I remember going to university and then going into work, and it is that first, whenever you meet someone new, that first question is kind of, what do you do? And that question always seems to be around work. And you're right, it's like there's so much more to the world and so much more to ourselves as individuals. And so, it is going to be a big task to kind of unravel that and to start changing that culture. I think it is starting to change. I think we're at the start of that beginning to change. And if you look at some of the polling, 4-day working week, it's popular across the board, but it's more popular with the younger generation coming through. And I think there is that sense from the younger generation that they don't want their lives to be defined by work in the same way as it has been for their parents' generation or their grandparents' generation. I think that shift is starting to change. I think that's quite exciting, but it is going to take a while to shift that.
Is this about having more of a focus on, well, it's partly about enjoying your life, quite rightly, isn't it? But it's also about impact and meaning rather than busyness in this kind of classic sense that we've just talked about.
Yeah, and some of those conversations are quite interesting, because we do coaching as well. We do coaching and training with companies and organizations to help them with moving to a 4-day working week. And it's interesting. It's like we often ask the question at the very beginning, what do you define as kind of success for your organization? Kind of what are those metrics? What's the real bits of work or focus that really brings the kind of rewards for the organization? And sometimes there can be a sense of confusion amongst kind of businesses and companies. I'm often surprised they're almost not clear about what they're actually trying to achieve in a working week. And I think it's fascinating, and I think it does highlight the kind of culture we've had in this country for a long time. It's just kind of we work these hours and we kind of do stuff in that time. And actually, what we're saying is that actually we can be more focused, we can be more strategic about what we're trying to get done at work, and fit that into 4 days. And then enjoy our lives much more outside of work.
And we start learning about these concepts so early, don't we? I mean, I vividly remember my daughter, she's 10 now, but when she was 2, my husband put her down for a nap. And he was, I can hear something upstairs. What's going on? And he went upstairs and she was sitting in my office where I'm sat right now, pretending to tap on the keyboard. She was only 2 years old at the time. And my husband went, what are you doing? And she said, I am too busy to nap, Daddy. So it's just frightening how early on in life we start to realise that our value is kind of demonstrated through this sense of being busy, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And why, I think we do have to ask the question, like, why is it seen as a badge of honour to be sort of busy all the time? Why is that something that we kind of reward or we're seen to kind of elevate someone's social status because they're busy all the time. I mean, I don't think that's really a good thing to strive for. And it is, even you're right, even when we go to school for the first time, whatever it is, 7 or 8 years old, we're 5 days a week. We're on the 5 days a week model, and it's drilled into us from the very start. And obviously, we're talking at what we are kind of advocating for in the long term is a kind of societal economic shift to a 4-day working week for everyone. Of course, you couldn't really do that overnight. You can't really give all of the schools a 4-day week unless you're giving parents a 4-day week too, which is why we actually launched our manifesto this week, which is why we're saying, there does need to be coordination on this from kind of government, business leaders, trade union leaders to really think about how we can implement this across the economy. But yeah, it's going to take a long time to shift the mentality. But I'm feeling encouraged that is starting to happen.
Yeah, I was going to ask that question about something like schools, because I know there's work being done to try and get this into the NHS, healthcare workers, to try and increase productivity and give people a bit more of a break. But it'd be interesting to explore, I guess, how that works. Are there any schools or any sort of educational institutions that are picking it up or are at least trying to do something with it?
Yeah, there's a handful of schools that have moved to a 4.5-day week, but because of the government regulation, there's a certain amount of hours. I think it's 32 hours that have to be delivered, just by the kind of education laws. So that does make it trickier in the education sector for them to actually do a true kind of 4-day week for staff and kids. And I think it's almost a separate conversation around the kind of benefits for children and kids of being in school one day less. I think there is a compelling case for kids and their development, to have more time to play and have more time outside of the kind of classroom and the kind of exam kind of culture which comes with schools. But I think that's quite a separate case from kind of benefits for teachers. But if we think about all of the sectors of the economy, I can't really think of two better examples where burnout, stress, overwork are kind of rife. That is, you think about NHS and schools. You look at the data on this. I mean, it's particularly in education. Teachers are leaving after a year burnt out, and and that means the kids' education suffer because the best teachers are moving on and not staying in the sector, and creates all sorts of problems in terms of job recruitment, job retention. So they really, if we're thinking about this holistically, there is a case for getting there, but it's quite difficult to implement that on a kind of bit by bit, one school here, one school there. There does need to be some wider coordination.
Yeah, and it was commented in this. As I said, I told a WhatsApp group that you were coming onto this call this morning, and got loads of comments back. And that was one of the questions. So, okay, if the school goes to a 4-day week, what's the point in me having a 4-day week? I might have to go back to a 5-day week, because if the kids are around, then I lose the benefit of having that 5th day to myself.
I think a lot of parents probably want more time with their kids, but I'm sure it goes the other way as well. And I mean, obviously, there's all sorts of problems with childcare in this country as well, which hopefully is finally getting a bigger conversation around it anyway. But yeah, it's tricky. And the worrying thing in the NHS as well is that if you look at all the survey data, the number one reason NHS workers are leaving is because there's a lack of work-life balance. It comes back time and time again in all the survey data. It's the first reason they're putting. And so yes, we need more nurses and doctors, and yes, there probably would be some cost to that, and the government would have to, put some money in there. But whatever's happening right now is not working, for anyone. So we do need to think bigger.
So who's coming to you then? So who's coming to help for you to help? We hear 4-day week is being sort of more widely adopted by small businesses, but who's sort of coming to you demanding help or looking for help?
Yeah, so it's a really, really wide mix of companies, really. It does tend to be at the moment the kind of smaller businesses in the private sector who've kind of been the kind of earlier pioneers. There's definitely hundreds of those companies that have done it in the UK, which is a significant. It's a kind of still a relatively smaller scale, but it's a significant change in where we were a few years ago, where you could kind of count the amount of 4-day week companies on one or two hands. And we ran the biggest ever pilot of a 4-day working week in the world so far. Last year, we had about 61 companies signed up, which was the equivalent of 3,000 workers. And the exciting thing was it was a real mix of companies from across different sectors of the economy. So we had kind of healthcare, retail, manufacturing, hospitality. We had a fish and chip shop taking part. We had a brewery taking part. And they weren't all taking Fridays off. Some of those companies were doing 32 hours, but on a different rotation. So some staff having Mondays off, some staff having Fridays off. Some companies even doing 5 days, but 5 much shorter days. So 32 hours over 5 days. But the overriding principle, they're reducing hours by 80% and maintaining pay. And the results were incredible. We had almost every company at the end of that 6-month trial decided to continue with it, and really, really impressive results in terms of the benefits for workers, better well-being, better mental health, people just reporting that their life satisfaction's up, enjoying their lives more. And then on the flip side, for the companies, companies actually making more profits than they were before. Job retention up, reduction in sick days. So it's a real clear benefits for businesses as well. So it tends to be a real mix. We've started running more kind of national rollout programs, and we're going to run those kind of quarterly to support companies in moving to 40 minutes. It does seem to be a real mix, really. I can't really pin it down in terms of this particular sector that comes to us more.
And Joe, that kind of impetus, that energy for those conversations you've talked about with companies, where is it coming from? Is it coming more from the kind of grassroots, the employees, or is the drive coming from leaders? What trends are you noticing there?
I think initially, and I think that's where we are, I believe we're at the very beginning of a societal shift towards a 4-day working week. And if you look at the history of the kind of move from a 6-day week to a 5-day week, it did take at least a decade. It was at least a decade for that change to happen. I think we're at the very beginning of that. So in that respect, it is the kind of early pioneers. It is the bosses who are like, what, this sounds really good. We're going to make this work. I believe in my workers, and I'm really going to value them by giving them this change, but also it's going to kind of benefit our business as well. In terms of better productivity and all the rest of it. So I think it is, I think the kind of hundreds of companies that have done it so far, they are the kind of the people, the bosses, the good bosses, if you like, who really believe in it, who really believe in passing back to their workers, which has been great. But that's not going to lead to a 4-day working week for everyone. So we are starting to see more and more of kind of workers thinking about how they can kind of start organising for this in their workplace. Can they start demanding this and they're presenting the kind of case for it to their employer, and we are trying to get more and more support from the trade union movement as well, in terms of them also being involved in this, because we've got to remember it was the trade unions that basically won us the weekend 100 years ago. So we think there's definitely a role for them to play in this.
That's so interesting. And what it makes me think of is some of the conversations I've had with people who have successfully taken on a 4-day week, and how it forces you to be really disciplined in how you spend your time across those 4 days, like less meetings and all that kind of thing. Are there any trends that you've seen in those changes in working habits that people might need to make in order to really go for it with a 4-day week?
Yes, I think there's 2 parts to the 4-day working week being implemented successfully. The first part is just that, you reduce people's hours, well-being does go up, and that is always passed on back to the kind of workplace. So that you do just get natural productivity gains from that. But the second part of it is about working differently and working smarter and kind of refocusing priorities sometimes for organizations. And we do a whole load of work with companies sometimes to think about that. And you do also sort of naturally adjust. It's like, for example, when I start my working week on a Monday, I know it's Monday to Thursday, so you just adjust to fit things in until then. And sometimes that will mean having a much busier Thursday than I normally would do. But I'm quite happy to work like that and have a kind of get quite a lot done on that Thursday, to mean that Friday I'm fully off and not thinking about work at all. So that's been reported back a few times by employees. So this sort of like you naturally adjust to fit your work into those 4 days.
But then you have to be quite disciplined, don't you? So I've said several times to Zoe, right, that's it, doing a 9-day fortnight. And then when it comes to that Friday and somebody sends you that email saying, oh, could you just fit in a call on Friday morning? You go, well, yeah, I suppose I could, because then I've got the whole of the rest of the day ahead of me. And then suddenly 2 calls and then 3 calls and then that disappears. So I guess it's easier for an organizer, it should be easier for an organization like mine or Zoe's to just say, right, that's it, that's what we're doing. And then when anybody joins, that's what they're joining, as opposed to creating this change in an organisation that's just not used to it.
Yeah, and I think that highlights one of the biggest problems we're facing, which is that, organisations that are moving to a 4-day working week are doing it still in a society which is very dominated by this kind of 5-day working week and this kind of always on culture. And, we also have to consider the impact that, smartphones have had on the workplace, and this kind of, this always on, you're always expected to kind of have your emails on your phone and respond to stuff. And that's why we do always say when companies move to a 4-day week, is like, don't hide the fact you've done it, kind of put it on your email signature, make sure people know that's how you're working, so people, because then people know not to contact you on that Friday, because usually they can just contact you on the Monday instead. It's not normally. We all have moments in work where you just really need to get your head down and get stuff done, but most of the time it's not like that, and stuff can wait until the Monday. But it's tricky, without society kind of wholeheartedly adopting that, across the board, and so everyone's kind of knows that that's the new working pattern, that you are going to have those issues. So there is a level of discipline, but we don't find it takes that much. And we all have on our email signatures, we all have our standard working days are Monday to Thursdays, and people know that, I think.
So which companies are doing this especially well? Through your work, who have you seen, Joe, that's implemented this really effectively?
That's a good question. I mean, it's always the best case. Best cases are always the ones where there's like real amount of time has been put into with staff consultation beforehand. So to really sit down with staff, talk through their hopes, their fears, and try and work through some of those as much as possible before actually adopting it. To really include them in the process, so they're really built into the kind of journey. Friends of the Earth, actually, the NGO you may have heard of, they've just moved to a 4-day working week, and they took their time over it. I think they took between 6 months to a year in terms of the senior HR managers and senior management really considering it and thinking about how it's going to work, then having a full consultation process of all the different departments to see how it was going to work. They didn't come into it saying this is how we're doing it and everyone's going to have this day off. And in the end, they've ended up, because that through their consultation, they've ended up with half the staff having Mondays off and half the staff having Fridays off, and they've done it that way. But yeah, that's one recent example that's been successful.
And they're doing I read this week, and I think I've got a friend and colleague who lives in Lisbon, and talked about how they were talking about a trial in Portugal. Now they've instigated it, haven't they? Which is really interesting across many organisations and businesses out in Portugal. And an interesting thing, sort of a related comment to that, is the article I was reading was in an American publication, and they were talking about the huge influx of young Americans to Portugal for that very reason, which I found fascinating.
That is interesting. I didn't know about that. That's funny. They've just come for the 4-day week, even though it's just a trial with 40, 50 companies. That's funny. But yeah, I mean, I think that does show how popular it is. And I mean, we think things are bad here. We should look at the USA in terms of working hours. And I don't think they even get much paid holiday in America. So they're definitely, things are worse over there. So I'm not surprised that they're desperate for 4-day. But it is a conversation which is taking off all over the world, including in America. We've seen a couple of states advocating for this, and kind of legislation being pushed through the Congress as well. So it's definitely a conversation which is taking off. And yeah, in Scotland, in Portugal, in Spain, I think there's government pilots starting this year. And obviously there was a big pilot which took place in Iceland, which again was very successful and resulted in almost the entire population in Iceland moving to a shorter working week. So that's the country that's kind of furthest ahead on the journey. And then other notable, like high, multinational companies as well. There's Microsoft in Japan trialed it, and Unilever are trialing it in their Australia and New Zealand offices at the moment. So it's definitely, which is exciting just to see that taking off, across the globe, because it's kind of funny when you think about it. Like this 9 to 5, 5-day working week is still the norm across the Western world, even though the economies are very different. That seems to be the standard.
Yeah, it's so interesting, isn't it, to see how different countries are approaching this stuff. And it's fascinating you mentioning Portugal, because Paul, I remember we discussed something about this, didn't we, during one of the lockdowns, how they're quite progressive on things like working from home policies. And I think they also have that digital nomad visa as well. So you talked there, Joe, about this kind of societal shift that needs to happen in different countries for the 4-day week to really be implemented across the board. Is that what's required to have this real legislative firepower behind it to truly embed it?
Yeah, I think so. And, if you think about the nature of the global economy now, it is global. People are working with people all over the world all the time. And I think even more so now, the move towards Zoom and, working through different platforms. So, it would be better if it's, because we've actually worked with quite a few kind of global corporations as well, or organizations that have offices all over the world. And it's like, that it's going to be difficult to implement 4-day week in one place if there are other partners who are working 5 or 6 days a week in another country who they work with all the time. So we'd hope that it would kind of spread like that. I think it has got to that stage now where workers, particularly in this country, a lot of workers are burnt out, they're stressed, they're overworked, and a lot of them aren't being paid very well either. And like working long hours for very little pay, it's not really, it's no way to live. And there is this sense now that people are desperate for change, really. And I think that applies across more broadly, across the globe, not just in the UK. I think it's a problem across Western economies.
So if I am a leader and I want to implement this, number one, I can pick up the phone, get in touch with you and the campaign and get some help to do it. But role modeling has always been really important to me. I was reflecting a story that I heard when I was working for a firm of accountants, and the floor plan was such that the lifts were sort of central to the building, and it was circular, so you could move around the office in different ways. And there was one partner, so very, very high up in the organization, but had a small child that he needed to pick up from nursery. And rather than walk past his team to get to the lift, he'd walk the other way to get to the lift on the days where he had to go and pick his child up from nursery, which I felt was really sad and also not great role modeling. So how do you help leaders who need to sort of step up and make sure that they're leading by example to actually do that?
Well, the best thing is to actually make sure that if you're a senior management level, that you actually do it as well, because we have seen that a few times where the rest of the workforce is doing sticking to their 4-day week, but the kind of managers are coming in on a Friday, and it actually that sets a bad example, because then as a more junior employee, you feel like you're not working as hard as they are. So I would say to stick to it as much as possible for management, and of course, that may be trickier in the first couple of months, or there's always a period of adjustment when moving to a 4-day week. We wouldn't necessarily expect everyone to have 4 days every single week for the first 3 to 6 months, but by the end of that, it tends to be around 6 months. By the end of that 6-month period, the whole organization just does change the way it's working, and it does feel more natural for everyone. So sticking to it is important. But not just I think, as I was hinting at before, not dictating too much the kind of terms of everything. And we definitely worked with one quite big company who their parameters were that you can have the 4-day week if you're meeting these very specific performance targets. If they're not being met, then you're going to lose it. So there was one department who lost the 4-day week for a month during their 6-month trial because they weren't meeting their performance targets. And then they got it back afterwards, but it created a not very nice culture in the workplace, and we wouldn't recommend doing it that way.
We'll include some stories in the show notes, and anything you want to share as well, please do send through. But one I noticed was that, and I think I picked this up from the Daily Mail, which was always helpful, who were, this council is in trouble because they have implemented a 4-day week and everyone's really upset about it. But one of the things that they said from the headline I read was 4-day week trials in the public sector in South Cambridgeshire. Yeah. And it says they will test the 32-hour week on the principle that staff will work more intensely and productively. And it's that word intensely that really sort of hits home. It's like, well, yeah, you can have this, but, regiment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was only the Daily Mail that were angry about that council moving to a 4-day week. I don't think anyone else was. Definitely, because we worked with them on that, and there definitely hasn't been any complaints from residents. And the council are actually trying to save money through doing it, and from what we've seen, this actually works very well. They're actually meeting all of their performance targets. So. But yeah, and I think that is a problem. And perhaps, to be frank, that maybe, I'll be honest, maybe mistakes we've made as well in the campaign, like the principles in which we communicated the UK pilot. We were working on that with a few other organisations. Was the kind of 100-80-100 model, which is about kind of achieving 100% productivity in 80% of the time while maintaining pay. And actually, we've moved away from that now, because we don't think that's actually very, very helpful framing. Like, it is about, people will be more productive when they're working less, but it's also about working differently and changing the way you work. And so we do think that kind of 100-80-100 doesn't quite communicate for the week. Because in some cases, it will be about changing job descriptions to remove some tasks that aren't particularly useful, really. So I think sometimes, maybe we've got the communication a little bit wrong there, but I think we're starting to be clearer then around, how this works and how this works really well.
And don't believe the Daily Mail.
And don't believe the Daily Mail. Yeah, that's always a good one for life. But yeah.
So, Jo, what challenges do you see ahead for your campaign? So we talked a lot about where the campaign is now, but what challenges and perhaps what opportunities and trends do you see ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I think the main challenge is trying to persuade more and more organisations to move to a 4-day week while society is still so dominated by a 5-day week. And so the challenge there really is persuading the government, and obviously we're probably going to have a change of government in the next year to 18 months, persuading the government of the time to really take this seriously and really be involved in this, and involved in the coordination, because without government involvement, it's going to be very hard to see this kind of roll out across the economy. So I think that's going to be a big challenge over the next couple of years. But we're quite confident, and one area we haven't touched upon is like automation, artificial intelligence, new technology. I mean, all of this is going to make the workforce more productive, but it also is going to, reduce the amount of work and jobs there are available. And so from our point of view, the best way of dealing with that is a shorter working week. So you're sharing the kind of diminishing amounts of work more equally across the economy. I mean, and in that way, we can all benefit from artificial intelligence and automation. It means we don't need to be scared of it. So definitely, in terms of opportunities, we think that is going to be more and more of an opportunity. And if you think about the NHS, there's ways in which artificial intelligence and new technology is being rolled out across the NHS to make, for example, operations more efficient and productive, which should reduce the amount of work. So I think that's a huge opportunity, really.
No AI could actually make the 4-day week a bit easier to do.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, someone was saying the other day, we should already have a 4-day week, and AI should give us a 3-day week. But I don't think we're quite there yet in terms of advocating for a 3-day week, one day at a time. But yeah, I think definitely, and there was a Nobel Prize winning economist who said it about a month ago. He was like, artificial intelligence should mean finally workers get a 4-day week. And yeah, we definitely agree with him on that.
Amazing. Jo, thank you so much. This has been really inspiring. I'm sure lots of leaders listening to this will find it so useful for helping them plan for a 4-day week. And you've certainly got Paul and I thinking that we must try and work a 4-day week sooner rather than later. So thank you for all your practical advice and for giving us such a great insight into the trends out there.
That's right. Yeah, you should definitely give it a go. I always say, why not give it a go for a couple of months and see how it works. What's the worst that can happen? You try it for 3 months and see how it goes. But yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, thank you. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you so much to Jo for coming onto the podcast. A fascinating look at how we make that work-life blend work for us all. And we'd be really interested to know from all of our listeners how you're embracing the idea or not of the 4-day week or the 9-day fortnight. And if you are, your stories, please.
We'd love to hear about that. We're now going off on our summer holidays, so the next episode will be in September, which feels like a long way off, but we'll be here in a flash. In the meantime, you can find us on Twitter. We're at startsathetop1, and you can also email us at startsathetop@gmail.com.
And if you listen to us on Apple Podcasts or anywhere else that you can rate and review, please do. All those ratings and particularly the reviews help us to gather more listeners. So tell us what you like about the podcast. And we will come back to speak to you again in September. Thanks for listening.
See you in September.